Good afternoon, Prakhar, Sadvika, Uday. Good afternoon, all three of you. So, today let me revise the poem Childhood. So, here you are, dear students. Childhood theme you see, this poem deals with the transition of a person from childhood to adulthood. This poem deals with the transition of a person from childhood to adulthood. So, we shall come to know what happens and how we transform or how we go from one phase of our life to another phase and what happens at this transition phase. So this is what is there in this poem. The innocence and simplicity of the child is lost when he or she steps into adulthood. So because the child tends to develop rationality, logical thinking, then analytical skill, with the help of which he can decide on his own. He can develop his independent thoughts whenever the transition takes place and he steps into the world of adolescent. The poet presents some unanswered questions on the transition from childhood into adulthood. These questions are pertinent and universal. This happens with every one of us as it is universal problem, and it's not a problem exactly, it's the characteristics rather. What happens when we go for transition from one stage of our life to another. uh, and then the poet concludes the poem with the guess regarding where his childhood days might have discovered. He seems to be repenting at the passing away of his childhood days, which were full of fun and frolic. So the poet seems to be repenting. The poet seems to be repenting at the passing away of his childhood days. Why? Because the childhood is full of fun and frolic. The childhood is having less responsibility. The childhood is having a lot of freedom, you can say. But when a child gradually grows up and enters in the world of adolescent, what happens, like he develops his independent thoughts, he tends to take up or assume more responsibility, therefore his life becomes more and more stressed. That is why he loses, and that is how he loses his former independence, you can say his former freedom, because he is now busy with diverse work. So that is why probably the poet is not happy. He seems to be repenting at the passing away of his childhood days, which were full of fun and frolic. So, good afternoon, all of you. Please stay connected. Let me devise this poem, Childhood. So, you can see here, when did my childhood go? Was it the day I ceased to be 11? So the poet says that the poet is not able to sort of realize when he underwent transition from childhood to adulthood. He said maybe, probably, when I sort of became 11 years old. Okay, when the day, was it the day I ceased to be 11? Okay, whenever I completed, was it the day I completed my 11 years of age, did I become adolescent? Was it the time when I realized that hell and heaven could not be found in geography and therefore could not be? Was that the day? Okay, so is it that day? Was it the day when I realized that there is no concept like hell and heaven? There is no concept like hell and heaven. Was it the time I realized that hell and heaven could not be found in geography and therefore could not be? Was that the day? So hell and heaven is a concept which is sort of told to us in our early childhood. But this is an abstract concept which does not take place in geography, come in geography, or which is not found in the books of history and geography. Therefore, these are all sort of abstract concepts. So, was it the day the poet says, was it the day when I could study on my own the books of geography and found that there was no entry of the words like hell and heaven? I think this is the day when I became adolescent, when my childhood was over. So let us go through the paraphrase now. The poet wonders about the fact that he was quite unaware when his childhood phase had passed. The, he guesses that it might be when he completed 11 years. He further guesses when he realized that names like heaven and hell could not be found in maps, he might have crossed his childhood phase. The poet wonders about the fact that he was quite unaware when his childhood phase had passed. He guesses that it might be when he completed 11 years. He further guesses when he realized that names like heaven and hell could not be found in maps, he might have crossed his childhood phase. So he's making several assumptions, he's making some guesses as to when his childhood days gave way to his adulthood. When did my childhood go? Was it the time I realized that adults were not they were not all they seemed to be? They talked of love and preached of love, but did not act so lovingly. Was that the day? So he says, when did my childhood go? Was it, he's again making several guesses, like in the first stanza, he made several guesses. So this stanza as well, he is making several guesses. He's not absolutely certain about the reasons of, as to when he became, adolescent, when his childhood stage gave way to adolescent stage. So he says, was it the time when I could understand that adults were not all they seem to be? Adults means here the elderly people might be adults, those who are elder to him. They were not all they seem to be. They were they talked of love and preached of love, but they did not act so lovingly. So there is a dichotomy, there is a conflict, or you can say there is a stark difference, contrast in the way they speak and the way they preach. So there is a lot of difference. They do not do whatever they preach, so they do not practice whatever they preach. So there is a difference in whatever they say and whatever they do. It means they are hypocrites. Adults were hypocrites. So the moment the poet says he has developed power of logical thinking, power of analytical thinking, the moment he could realize that adults did not mean what they say. Adults talk of love, of course, preach of love, of course, but in reality, they do not practice love. This is probably the stage when his childhood has given way to his adolescent stage. So, in stanza 2, like in stanza 1, he is making several assumptions about the day when he has gone through the transition of his childhood phase. Okay, now you see what the expression means. Adults were not all they seem to be. It means his eyes opened up to the hypocrisy of the adult world, where love is preached but not practiced. Love is preached but not practiced. So this is what is called hypocrisy. Okay, when you when you say something but in reality you do not follow it, you do not do it, then you are called a hypocrite. Okay, and your act is called hypocrisy. Okay, your instances are called hypocrisies. Okay, so the poet ponders over the transition which he guessed might have occurred when he realized that adults were not what they appeared to be. They spoke and preached of love, but did not practice it in their lives. Of course, they speak of love, they preach about love, but they did not practice it in their lives. The poet guessed that his childhood phase might have been over on that moment of realization. The poet guessed that The poet made several guesses that his childhood phase might have been over on that moment of realization. So the poet is thinking over the transition, and he thinks that whenever he develops his analytical thinking, his reasoning skill, that adults were not what they appear to be. The poet guessed that his childhood phase might have been over on that moment of realization. Now let's pass on to stanza 3. When did my childhood go? Was it when I found my mind was really mine, to use whichever way I choose, producing thoughts that were not those of other people, but my own, and mine alone? Was that the day? Now the poet makes another guess. He says, was it the day when I developed my independent thought? My mind was really mine. It means the poet became aware of his own ability to think and realized that he could think independently. The day when the poet developed his own independent thought is the day he thinks he has past his childhood phase, and his childhood phase gave way to his adolescent phase. To use whichever way I choose, he can use his mind in whatever way he can, because he has developed his independent thought. His thoughts are no longer dependent on the dictates of the adult people or the elderly people, producing thoughts that were not those of other people. Because when he was a child, he was constantly, guided by the thoughts of others. But now he has his own thoughts. He has developed his own thinking. That is when he has developed his independent thinking, and that is when the poet thinks that he has crossed his childhood phase and entered the world of adolescent or adult age. Okay, so there are several guesses. Of course, we cannot say for sure, but of course, this is correct. This is absolutely correct that whenever we develop our independent thoughts, whenever we sort of build up our own ability to think and take independent decisions, that is when we become adult, we become adolescent. Okay, so that's about stanza 3. And lastly, last two lines he said, but my own and my alone, mine alone was that the day. He says the thoughts that are produced in my in my brain, these thoughts are my thoughts only. These thoughts are not guided by the thoughts of others, unlike my childhood days when I was guided by by the thoughts of others. Okay, now I have developed my own thought. That is why my thoughts are mine alone, exclusively mine. And probably that is the stage when I have stepped into the world of adolescence. In the process of growing up, the poet woke up to the fact that he had a mind which could think on its own, have individual thoughts and ideas, and could use it as he decided to. Was it this understanding of his individuality that made him a man? Of course, that is when he stepped out of his childhood phase. Whenever he could sort of identify that adults are hypocrites. Adults do not practice what they preach. They, of course, do talk about love. They, of course, do preach about love, but in reality, they do not practice love. And of course, the day when he has developed his independent thought, this is the stage when he had given or bade farewell to his childhood days. Then, lastly, he's saying, in the last stanza, he's saying, it went to some forgotten place. He's not able to exactly understand as to which is the day when he underwent transition. That is why he made several assumptions, and towards the end of the poem, he's saying, it went to some forgotten place that's hidden in an infant's face. I cannot say for sure the day when I have crossed my childhood stage. Therefore, I can only say that it was hidden in an infant's face. Now that I no longer look like an infant, so I have overcome the stage of my infancy. Therefore, my childhood was lost in the on the face of an infant, because I no longer look like an infant. So I cannot claim myself to be a child anymore. It went to some forgotten place. It's gone somewhere. I don't know where it has gone. It means, the poet means to say that whenever I was not able to decide on my own, whenever I used to forget a lot, whenever I did not have any independent thinking, whenever I had a face like that of an infant, that is exactly when I was a child. But no longer I am a child, because I have developed all the characteristics that will qualify me to be called as an adult or an adolescent, and my childhood is lost in a forgotten place in an infant's face. And that's all I know. And that's how the poet, uh, you know, ends the poem. So, forgotten place means innocence of childhood, which can be found in the face of an infant, is forgotten thereafter when the child grows up. So, whenever the child grows up, that particular innocence of his face is also forgotten. Infant's face means innocent of childhood is visible on the child's face. And paraphrase, you see, the poet cannot figure out where his childhood has disappeared into. Perhaps it has gone to a place long forgotten and hidden itself beneath the face of an innocent infant. His childhood must be hidden in the face of an infant, in the innocence that is long forgotten. The poet cannot figure out where his childhood has disappeared. Perhaps it has gone to a place long forgotten and hidden itself beneath the face of an innocent infant. His childhood must be hidden in the face of an infant, in the innocence that is long forgotten. So, before we end, finally, let us recapitulate what we have learned today. The poet cannot figure out when exactly he stopped to be a child, when he ceased means stopped. The poet cannot figure out exactly when he ceased to be a child. When he turned 12 years old, he realized that the concepts of heaven and hell were merely fanciful. The concepts of heaven and hell were merely abstract concepts which are not found in the books of geography and history. In one of the phases of his transition from childhood, he could realize the hypocrisy of the adult people. He realized that they did not practice what they preach. And then his individuality developed as he further grew up. His individuality developed. He started thinking independently without being influenced by the thoughts of others. When he was a child, his thoughts were influenced by the thoughts of others. But now that he has become adolescent, his thoughts have become independent. His thoughts are no longer limited by the thoughts of the adults. The poem concludes with a shift in the question from when to where his childhood had disappeared. Towards the end of the poem, in the last stanza, you might have seen, instead of asking when, he's asking where. It means there's a switch. There's a switch in the question from when to where his childhood had disappeared. And the poet comforts himself with a guess that it must be hidden in the face of an infant, in the innocence of the infant's face that is long forgotten. Because as and when a child develops into an adolescent, uh, you know, he bids farewell to his innocent face. He bids farewell to his infant's face. So that is when, with the loss of his innocent face, with the loss of his infant's face, he probably seems to have come out of his childhood phase. So that's all about the poem, childhood. It describes a very universal, process, a universal phenomenon of the development stages of a child's life, both physical as well as intellectual development. Every human being goes through this growth and development, both physical and intellectual, mental. So this is inevitable. It happens in everyone's life, and mm, it happens with the life of the poet as well. So that is why he asks several questions, when do we exactly go through the transition phase? And he has given several assumptions, of course, and some of the assumptions are universal true, of course, because even though they are assumptions, but they are factual as well, in the sense that as soon as we develop our faculty of rational thinking and logical power of thinking, we tend to come out of the phase of childhood. As soon as we can learn to decide what is right and what is wrong for us, what is happening to us is right and what is happening to us is wrong, that is when we seem to have developed our power of independent thought and rational thinking, and that is when the transition takes place. It is both physical as well as intellectual. Physical in the sense that we tend to lose our infant's face. Okay, we become tall, we develop some kind of physical characteristics. One of them is mentioned, of course, in the poem, that is, we lose our infant's face. So that's when we switch to the world of adolescent or adult. Okay, so that's all about it. You can go through the NCT solution from the website. I mentioned all this, I've already uploaded for you. So next we will come up with another lesson. So we shall meet day after tomorrow, that is Wednesday. I shall take your class once again. Wednesday. Okay.